Hello and welcome to Flying High with Flutter. I'm your host, Alan Wyma. Today I have a very special guest. It's Eric Windmill. He is the author of Flutter in Action. And we've had a very special, so because of, we were actually worked with Manning to get him on here and present his, talk about the book that he wrote a while back. We actually have a couple copies to give away, and we'll be getting in touch with you guys how to do that. But in the meantime, let's get started. Let's get started with the interview. So, Eric, how are you today?
I'm very well. Thank you for asking. How are you?
It's too hot over here in Hong Kong. It must be like 90% humidity with about 90 degrees Fahrenheit. It's crazy out here.
That is rough.
But that's why you only see me from the top half off. Bottom is more casual.
Yeah.
But why don't we just go ahead and get started? Like, what actually drove you to write a book? Because that's a huge endeavor, right?
Yeah, it definitely is. I actually, the website Flutter by Example that I also wrote, or own, I guess, came first, actually, because I like to write. Even at my current job, I often am the volunteer to write documentation because I don't mind doing it. I enjoy it. So I never really planned on writing a book. It never even crossed my mind that was possible. I was just going to do it all digitally, but Manning actually reached out to me after finding Flutter by Example, I guess. I mean, I don't know exactly how they found me, but I have to imagine that's the only real way. And luckily for me, that was in the very early days of Flutter. I think it was still in alpha, so there wasn't really anyone else to reach out to. I was the default option, I guess. I guess it was serendipitous. They're more to thank for it than I am.
That's a good question. So what actually got you started into Flutter? Because you said you're there in alpha. Was that pre 1.0, I guess?
Yes, it was over a year before 1.0, easily, maybe. But again, it was just right place at the right time. I got a job hired as a web developer where they were using Dart in-house for their web. They were just like Dart with web components or whatever. I can't remember what that old library was called that doesn't exist anymore, but it was basically, anyways, their web apps were in Dart, and so then when Flutter came around, they were already aware of it, and they just thought it was a very small startup, so they just thought it would be advantageous to rewrite the mobile apps in Flutter also, so that they could share a lot of that code. That was a lot of that functionality was already in Dart, and I just got hired as a web developer, and then pretty much as soon as I started was right when they started rewriting the app in Flutter. So that just became what I did with most of my time. I had, if I'm being honest, never even heard of Dart until I started interviewing for that job. So right place at the right time, honestly. I mean, they were very early adopters, so early that it's a very small startup, but Google was still working directly with my boss to get feedback and everything like that on Flutter. So he's really the person that, I don't know, was made a wise choice early on.
So how was your feeling with Flutter back then, right? Because that must be really rough.
Yeah, I mean, I will say to their credit, it worked pretty well that early, I will say. Obviously, there was no web, no desktop, anything. It was just iOS and Android. But, a lot of the biggest challenges for me were more in going from JavaScript to Dart than they were, there weren't so many bugs. There was more of those lacking features. One thing I remember being a huge challenge was there was no maps. There was no official Google plugin for maps. And so we struggled a lot because we needed that in our app with how to make that work. But it was more missing features. There weren't many bugs that were showstoppers. I can't think of any absolute showstopper bugs, which is I don't know, pretty cool for them, honestly. They did well from the start.
Was it actually still called Flutter at the time, or were you a little bit after? Because I think before it was called Hummingbird or something, right?
Yeah, I think it was called Hummingbird, but yeah, but by the time I joined, it was already called Flutter. Yeah.
Okay, so you started using it. You're having a pretty good time, I suppose. Was there anything that was kind of a little bit rough that you really didn't enjoy? Or was it all pretty smooth for what was there?
Um, but it was overall smooth. Like it didn't take me long to. It didn't take me more than a few months to be like, oh yes, this is the way. This is awesome. I love this. But it was more the challenges again coming from like JavaScript to Flutter. JavaScript is a very strange language in many ways. So going to Dart, which is strongly typed and truly object oriented, and these are things that I didn't have a ton of experience with. I mainly was like front end web developer, but Flutter, mentally is very similar to like React and other front end I don't know, styles of programming. So that was pretty smooth, I think. And also, I mean, there was more to like than there was to be annoyed at. I would say I personally struggled with things like writing plugins because I had I had never done a single thing with mobile apps in my life. So like native code and stuff, that was harder to wrap my head around. But it worked pretty well. I was very happy to not have to use CSS and HTML anymore. Like it was all just built right in. I think from a mental model standpoint, like Flutter nails it. That's the best thing about it. It's really easy to wrap your head around how to use it pretty quickly.
Yeah, that was really nice when I started working with Flutter. Like I didn't even learn much about Dart. I just dove right in and just kind of figured out most of what's going on. But yeah, once you learn Dart, then you can do a lot more things. But what you can do without learning Dart is pretty amazing, I think.
Yeah.
And knowing JavaScript, then like you can really get pretty far.
Yeah, you're more than halfway there already. If you know JavaScript even kind of well.
Definitely. But like, what I was mentioning to you before we even started this recording was like, what I like most about your book is how in depth you go about. You don't go super in depth, but you go pretty far compared to other resources I looked at when you talk about like how rendering works within Flutter. And like after reading that introduction, I thought that was so insightful and makes a lot more sense because Dart is a pretty quick language. And then like I always wonder, like, wait, if you're calling this function 60 times a second, like that sounds really expensive, but what's actually underneath the hood is quite interesting. Do you mind like talk more about that? Because not many people actually talk about that.
Yeah, sure. I'll preface this by saying I haven't used Flutter for work in over a year, so forgive me if I botch anything. But so the way that Flutter works under the hood, which is really interesting, I guess, is that there's like I guess 3 different tree structures, each working together. So the only thing that we as developers really care about is the widget tree. I mean, you can get it. You might have to like work with elements, but I have used Flutter. I've used Flutter for like 3 years at 2 different jobs, and I never had to use a custom element. So you really only care about the widget tree, but the widget tree is just like basically just metadata, I guess, if you like want to put it that way. It's just like an instruction of configuration. So it's really cheap to, blow that away and insert new widgets into the tree, especially if you're using best practices that like allow you to only rebuild certain widgets. It's the element tree underneath, which is kind of like the brain of it that's also controlling the rendering. That's more expensive, and it can be reused for different kinds of widgets. So it's really the I guess the interesting thing for developers is that what we are writing is just configuration. Like the code that we're writing, is just configuration. We're not actually telling the Flutter engine how to behave, which is probably why it's so performant, because they've spent a lot of time and brain power on building that engine. I'm trying to think like where to go with this. I don't know. I mean, if how it works specifically, again, it's been a while, but the widget, every time it rebuilds, each element is like associated with one widget. I mean, it's just literally pointing at it, and so Flutter's smart enough to know, okay, this button changed color, so we need to blow that away, and it's reconfigure it, and then once it gets that configuration from the widget, it turns around and tells the render tree what to redraw. I mean, basically the elements are like the brain of the situation, which luckily we don't have to write ourselves, and they get really complicated when you do have to.
So you can almost think about it like almost like a MVC kind of style to a certain extent, I would think. Like widgets are kind of like the view, but abstract, right? Well, not even, right? They're like the model. And then the controller would be like the element, right? Where it's kind of checking and talking in between the two. And then finally, the view would be the render object.
Render object, that's right. Man, it's been so long I couldn't remember that word, render object. But I've never thought of it. That's never come to my mind. But now that I think that's actually a really good way to explain it. It's pretty straightforward and also accurate.
So if you need a co-author for this next revision, you can reach out to me. I'll help you.
Gladly. It's a lot of work. So
that's what I heard. It's funny because I mean, again, like my question is like, what drives you? Like, sure, they reached out to you and you're like, yeah, sure. But was it like, oh, I can knock this thing out because I've been writing on Flutter by example for a while, so it shouldn't be too bad.
Yeah, I mean, I knew it was going to be a lot of work, but I will say I underestimated how much work it was going to be, and also the timeline. So internally, what drove me is that I just like writing and like creative endeavors, and even though it's a technical book, it's still somewhat creative. And I am kind of a workaholic, so I don't mind spending a few hours every Saturday and Sunday at the coffee shop, writing. And then externally, what drove me is I cannot give enough props to Manning. I've never worked with any other publishing company, so I don't have anything to compare it to, but they help a lot. They give you timelines, which they're not hard on, so. But anyways, they're just they're very motivated. They're gently pushing you the whole time, and also giving you all the resources you need. So I don't know, they were great. I had, you have your own specific publisher who they have multiple projects, I guess. And I don't know if they're all great, but mine specifically, she was awesome. She was very helpful, very motivating. So yeah, I guess a mixture of truly, I do see how people would start writing a book on their own to self-publish and never finish it, because, sometimes you're just man, I do not want to do this. But when you sign a contract, you have to, unfortunately. So that is definitely motivating, but more so, I don't know, I just like to write, and I thought it'd be cool to have a book with my name on it, pretty much.
I'm kind of curious. So, you said when you sign a contract, you kind of have to. Is there a clause that if you don't finish it by a certain date or time that you have to pay some damages?
No, you don't have to pay any damages, but you have to. They give you a. I cannot think today. What they give you a money up front that has a specific word, but I can't think of it right now. But you have to give it back if you don't finish. So that would suck unless you're financially smart. But no, you don't have to pay any damage or anything. And in fact, I don't know if I'm really supposed to say this, but I know that there was a book in the works, Dart 2 in action, that they canceled halfway through, So it's never a guarantee just because you sign a contract that it's going to see all the way through. But but it's not like a really big risk to sign the contract that nothing bad is going to happen if you. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of people that think they can do it and then they start and they're like, I have no responsibility, so it's easy for me to find time. If I had kids or family or like a more demanding job, I don't know how I would have found time to do it.
So I think it's called advance, right? An advance.
Yeah, advance. I can't believe I couldn't think that word, but yes. You have to give your advance back if you don't finish, which makes sense because, for obvious reasons, but yes.
Yeah, but your advance, it can't be that much money because I think,
no.
I don't know, what, $5,000 I think is like the max most people probably make on a book, right? So it couldn't be a lot.
$5,000 was the advance. I have made more than that, but I will say, do not write a book for financial reasons because it is not a good investment. The amount of time you go in, like the amount of hours I go in, it's not worth it. That's not a good reason. There are other advantages. I know that you didn't ask me this, but like my current job, I love my job. It's probably my favorite job to date. My boss, when he interviewed me, basically, he asked about the book, which means he saw my resume and was like, oh, wow, that's cool. So that's an advantage. I'm on this podcast. So like there's other cool things that you get from it, but not money.
Do you get anything back from Google? Do they reach out to you and say, can we feature your book or anything like that?
No, but there was a member of the Dart team, a technical product manager who was reviewing, who basically asked if he could review the book while it was in process. So every time I finished a chapter, he would read it and to make sure nothing was wrong, basically. But I did have an interview for the Flutter team because of the book, but then COVID happened and they froze the job. So, maybe one day, but, I don't know that it was because of the book, but it was for the Flutter team. So I imagine they reached out to me. So I imagine that had something to do with it.
Yeah, that would definitely make sense. Okay. Well, that's pretty positive too. That's, I think, worth a lot more than, than 10 advances, I think, at this point.
For sure.
It's a pretty big opportunity.
Yeah.
But you did take this Discovery job, right? Maybe we can kind of pivot for a moment because it's kind of interesting. Like you're working at Discovery Channel.
On the back end.
But you're not doing Flutter, which is like, so the guy's like, okay, you wrote a book. That's cool. I really want to interview you. But it's like not even the same topic. That's what I just don't get. I get, okay, you write a book that there's some qualities, some skills with that, right? You know how to articulate yourself, you know how to take your time, etc., and you're dedicated, right?
I don't know why this job was as often as I feel like happens often when I interview in this industry. I don't know why I ended up getting this job. I had no back end, all my jobs have been at startups, so I have plenty of back end experience, but I've been hired as the front end developer every job I've ever had until this. This is a purely back end, microservice down, streaming app, nitty gritty, back end job. And, a recruiter reached out to me and I was like, no, I'm not going to waste my time with the interview because I don't have experience with Go. And he was like, oh, just do it. And then I, somehow got the job. My boss at the time, he said, just let you know, you will not be doing any front end work. So you need to think about that before you accept this job. They were like, I have no idea how I ended up getting this job, but it is a fun, cool job. I wanted it personally because I didn't have any back-end experience. I got it to make myself more well-rounded. But I certainly didn't go looking for it. And it was during COVID, so I didn't expect to find a new job. This was last year when it was still very shut down, pre-vaccine.
Yeah, I guess everything's related that you're sticking in within Google land, right? Going from Flutter to Go, if you're using Go, right?
Yeah. And I like Go too, but I definitely prefer Dart. But Go is interesting, funny little language for sure.
Yeah, I've been playing around with Rust a lot recently, and I'm pretty happy with it. I mean, there's a couple things I don't really like about Go, like when you compare it to Rust, where like there's a lot more runtime safety within Rust. But what I do like about Go, and I wish Rust would do a better job of, which is like cross compilation. I feel like they have it much better. Where you could just say, okay, build me a Windows binary on like a Mac, and it's just you could just do it and not really think about.
Yeah, I don't have any Rust experience, but I would love. That's like the number one thing I would love to learn or use professionally, because then I would really learn it more. When I have no choice but to do hard things with it. And also the Rust book, which is free online, or you can buy a physical copy, is my favorite programming book by far. It is, it's like the book that I read while I was writing writing my book for inspiration, because it is just so, I don't know, it's just not dry. They like talk to you like a real person, It's not like you're reading a manual. It's like you're reading a book.
I'll have to go back and read it again. I think I read it a long time ago, but it'd be interesting to finish up reading your book and then going back and reading that one and see if they are really that similar. But yeah, it's pretty decent. Yeah, the book. And you didn't buy that. Did you buy a copy of that one? You said.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the only thing that's not nice about buying a copy is that it's going to be quickly outdated with the speed that it keeps getting updated.
Yeah, I know. I specifically bought it when I started writing the book so that I didn't always have to be reading on the computer. I didn't really buy it for the purpose of learning. I bought it for inspiration, I guess.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, it's probably one of the most famous books for reading Rust and just for reading about learning anything. That you mentioned it, I think I hear that a lot. People say that's the best book to learn Rust, and I think if you hear about like Flutter, like what's the best book, I think you're going to hear many different answers. So that's quite interesting. Okay, maybe let's kind of get back more about like yourself, right? So I think you said that you graduated with what's your background exactly in school?
Philosophy and Spanish were my majors. So I don't have a computer science degree.
So what happened?
Well, I guess like many people my age, I enjoyed, like light programming as a child growing up. So that's like kind of the background. I had some background in it, although I would not say I was employable by any means. And then when I got like a year after college, also like many people my age, I was like, what am I going to do? And also my degree is giving me nothing. Like I can't get it. They're not going to pay me to sit under a tree and think, which is what philosophers do. So, so I just started taking it. I just thought more about programming and started taking it more seriously. And, there's a billion resources. And I'm the first, right when I started like taking it seriously, I literally on Facebook, I found other people that were trying to learn, and I met up at coffee shops, and we like taught each other. Like that's how I basically started. And then, I guess it took a year, and I already had a lot of knowledge. And I know there's a lot of people that want to break into it. That's like a very common, and to them, I would say it is certainly possible. But it's a lot of work, but it is 100% possible for anybody to teach yourself how to do it.
Do you wish you would have went back in time and actually took a CS degree or something similar? Or do you feel that they took the right path already?
More so than that, I wish I had a job that would pay for me to get a CS degree now, or like a master's or something, because I would love to go back to school. But I wish I took classes, but I really do love Like my philosophy classes were my favorite classes. And also, I didn't really learn Spanish, even though it's my major, but I also love traveling and I studied abroad and stuff. I don't know that I would have had the confidence to do that if I didn't think that I was like at least okay in Spanish. So I did get a lot out of it. So I don't necessarily wish I changed it, but I wish I took some CS classes because, or if not, like minor in it or something, or maybe major in it and minor in philosophy. I don't know. I wish I was more aware of it. Like, it didn't even cross my mind in school because all I wanted to do was like, I don't know, listen to music and like take philosophy classes. I was like much more into like cultural stuff than, at that age. And yeah, I feel like that's definitely as time goes on, the gap gets smaller and smaller, but there is like a knowledge gap that anyone's going to have that doesn't take CS classes, because like I don't know much about like low level like systems programming and stuff like that. Like even conceptually, I don't really know. So probably would have helped me a lot if I did that, but alas.
I am kind of curious, like, do you think, or maybe let's say it like this, if you were to like take 100%, right, take a whole, the whole amount of something, and let's balance it between being a good communicator / writer and being technically apt, like, which one do you think is, like, what do you think the percentages of each one for writing a good kind of book for technology, right? Because you may know everything, but you can't explain it. Or you may be able to explain something, but you don't know everything. There has to be a nice, smooth percentage, right?
Yeah, I suppose that has to do with what you're writing, but for me personally, not only in writing a book, but also in being good software engineer in a large company, I think communication is more important. Unless maybe you're like writing the first book on developing self-driving cars, maybe then yes, you need to be extremely technical, or you're working for the self-driving car AI place like unit in Google. Like, yeah, you need to be extremely technical. Outside of that, I think communication is very important. And especially, I don't think I'm a good writer. I didn't take English classes or anything. But I do think I'm a good communicator, and I think about the best way to make something stick, I guess. Like in the way I try to explain things in the book. And I think that is really important. More important than people would give it credit for. So to answer your question, I would say 60% communication, 40% technical, because you have to know something, right? Like you can't write a book that's wrong.
Yeah, I was just about to say, it sounds like 60-40, I think. Slightly more communication, but you still can't lose out on the tech.
Yeah. To be honest, 50% of what's in the book, I didn't know until I was writing the book. I knew like what I wanted to talk about. I knew the chapters, and then I was like, okay, before I write this, for example, the chapter on how Flutter works under the hood, I need to actually go make sure that I know that, not think I know it. Like I was, and still am terrified that there's, about putting my name on a book that is wrong. But I guess the point is communication is harder to learn to be a good communicator than it is to learn how Flutter works.
Well, let's say that you weren't really wrong, but like, is there anything that you want to mention now about the book? Because I remember when we connected over email, you were like, hey, I don't really recommend this book for people to read because it's quite outdated. Like, is there some things that you think really are like, no, these things are solid, you should really know this from the book? Or in the other cases, some of these things it's like, okay, this is just way too outdated. Like, just please stay away from that.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that more. And yes, I don't know what other books are out there. Again, I feel that I'm like a step or two outside of the community since I'm not using it every day. So if there are newer books, I'm sure I would recommend them more. the part that I think is outdated, or the part that makes me nervous about recommending it, is not the Flutter stuff so much as it is the Dart stuff. Like non-nullable by default. That's a pretty big change, and so all the code is not that. And it's been out long enough, like that feature has been out long enough that no one is really going to be writing code, especially if they're new enough that they're wanting to read a book. No one's really going to be writing code in Dart 1 anymore. So that's the part that I'm more worried about. The Flutter stuff I think is pretty solid. Like more or less it works the same as far as I know. And also, if I was to rewrite it now, I would spend a lot more time on, because it's so cross-platform now, I would spend a lot more time on like deploying and the technical difficulties of making the differences between like what you have to do to build a web app and a mobile app and a desktop app. None of that existed when I started writing it, and the web wasn't, I don't think, released like as stable when I finished it. So that's a big difference.
Actually, I found it quite surprising that you were talking about desktop already in the book. I was like, whoa, this guy really knew the future, because I was
I knew it was coming.
Desktop. I had no idea it was coming, actually.
Yeah, so as I think I said, at my first job, we had a direct line to the Flutter team because in the very early days, they wanted to know how it was working for us. And so I did from a very early time, like way earlier than when they announced it, I don't know that I believed we were going to get here this well, because, I mean, it's truly pretty astounding how well it works for a cross-platform like SDK, but I did know that the goal was to truly write once and deploy everywhere.
Yeah, but now it's even more than just desktop, right? You also have, was it UWP or something like that? Like basically you can run it on Xbox or something, right?
I don't know if that, I mean, I'm going to say yes, but last I used it, that wasn't, I just in like the last couple weeks started a new thing at work that is going to hopefully use Flutter. I still have to convince people, but so anything that like big things that come out like that in the last year, I'm not completely positive about.
All right, actually, I want to kind of go back more to so the thing I like a lot about Flutter is that it's pretty easy for a lot of people to pick up, and I want to kind of talk more about, like, you didn't have a CS background. You were kind of hanging out in coffee shops and learning, like, and then like what was like the big break, like what happened that you just applied and then like people said, okay, let's give this guy a shot, although he has no prior background?
Yeah, it was my first job where I had to use Flutter. It's a very small startup. It is, I don't know, 10 people in the company, like 9 of them are technical, like either engineers or QA. And then 1 person is the CEO. Like that's the whole company. And basically they gave me a chance because I wrote them a really good email. Like they're such a small company that you can't go online and apply. On their website, it just says like, interested in working with us, send us an email at blah, 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 send us your resume. And I sent a really long email, not really long, like I wouldn't bore them to death or anything, but a very, I guess, good email that they liked, and that included like screenshots of personal projects and like code snippets and like, basically everything I needed to convince them that I could hang. And frankly, I'm not trying to say this to disparage them, but they're a very small startup that does not take funding. So they were probably happy to have somebody they could pay less than a seasoned engineer. But I am very grateful for them. And also, one of the people I worked with who's the one that like kind of introduced Dart to the company before I even started there. He's now on the either Dart team or Flutter team. So, I mean, my whole world basically is what it is because they gave me a chance. So that's great. Very thankful for them.
What kind of languages and frameworks and stuff did you learn before you had this job? Because it sounds like you already had JavaScript underneath your belt, right?
Yeah, and then I had some personal projects that are luckily no longer around, but for backends, I used Django and Rails, I guess, were pretty much the only things. And for front ends, I basically, well, I used React, and then I started like taking, like, I guess knowing enough to build a full deployed web application. React was already a thing. So like I've never really used vanilla JavaScript, which I know in the front end world, a lot of people debate whether or not you should do that first. I did use Vue quite a bit just because I wanted to put it on my resume, basically. Never used it professionally. But yeah, basically just React front ends and Ruby on Rails backends, Django. And then, I mean, I've never really used any of that stuff again, so I'm like not very proficient in Ruby or Python or anything, but I can hang, but not well. I've pretty much been Dart and JavaScript and now Go, I guess, since day one. Weirdly, I've used Dart more than any other language. I don't feel that common for people.
Yeah, Dart is such an odd language. Like, just using outside of Flutter is still quite unheard of. I think one of the few projects that's really quite popular is probably Sass. It's one of the few projects I think that's most popular written in just pure Dart.
Yeah.
I can't think of anything else off the top of my head.
I hope that changes personally. I mean, I maybe it's just because it's easy to pick up, but I really find Dart to be just the most pleasurable language. Like, has all the features you want without being like Java, which is like just too much. I don't know. I find it by far my favorite language. I know I'm biased, but I love Dart, and I hope it becomes like a standard for services or whatever. But I don't think it will because, I mean, you have Go and Rust and all these languages that are like targeting people that are writing services. Like, that's what it's made for. So why would they choose Dart? But I thoroughly enjoy it.
Something I'm kind of interested in is like, the thing that I would love to hear more about is like, I mean, we had one of the creators, Lars, I believe, was on here. I forgot which one it was. Two guys, right?
Yeah.
Sorry. Casper Lund was on here. Lars Bachman was the other guy, the older guy. Casper Lund was on here. I don't know why I didn't ask him this question, but like for me, I would love to know kind of like, I know that the history was that they wanted to basically have a better way of kind of putting JavaScript-like stuff on Chrome. Didn't quite work out like that, but like, I'm still like amazed at how can a language where it started off being like a JavaScript replacement then became something that could be running native stuff or compiling to JavaScript, or like you can have it as a VM with hot reload functionality, or AOT. Like I have never met a language which is so versatile in my life.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything else that's close to it that I can think of.
Yeah, I mean, that's another reason that I'm a very big fan of it. But, you know, obviously I can't speak for Google or anybody that has worked on those teams, but from what I understand, you know, it did not pan out as a JavaScript replacement, unfortunately. And I think that it really just was kind of, you know, just like being worked on, but not in a major way, and like not with really much expectations for years, and I really think Flutter changed that. I know that like the AOT compiler was added before Flutter, before it was Flutter, but like that wasn't always there. So I think a lot of the making it versatile was because the early Flutter team, like Eric Snyder, is that his name? I can't remember, but they decided.
Seidel.
Seidel,
right?
that's right. I've heard him say that on a podcast or whatever that they decided to use Dart very early on. They looked at a ton of languages, so they didn't choose Dart because it was Google. They chose Dart because they thought it was the best language. And I'm sure being internal to Google gives it a lot of bonus points because they can work closely with the team. But I think Flutter has a big part of it. And also I know that Dart is pushed pretty hard internally for like web apps and stuff. I don't know if that's changed because of Flutter or that was already the case, because like Angular Dart has been around forever, and I know that like AdWords is built in Angular Dart, so I don't know but I do know internally Google, they have teams, or at least employees, devoted to convincing people to switch to Dart so that it's like all unified.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. Like they have like, I would say there's basically three or four main languages, right? It's like Go, Dart, Java, and Python, and of course C++, right? Those are like the big languages at Google. Like, I'm kind of curious, like, why people would actually want to switch over to Dart, like, because all those languages I think are pretty. I mean, they do their own thing, right?
I think it's web apps is what their hope. They want people to switch from JavaScript basically to Dart.
I think if you want to switch from Dart to JavaScript, I think there's something wrong with you.
Yeah, I know. I've been nice thus far in this podcast about my feelings about JavaScript, but I like can't stand it. It's fine. It is what it is. There's no way you can't get away with not using it, but it is just so hard to use.
But going back to Eric Seidel, right? I think he was actually already on the Chrome team somewhere. I don't remember which part. Mm-hmm. And obviously V8 is also a part of Chrome in some way. And then I think they were not even compiling to native code yet, right? They were compiling to web first, and then they went to mobile, which is quite an interesting journey.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd love to hear that story.
Yeah, I mean,
pretty exciting.
As far as, again, I can't speak for anyone, but from what I've heard, the story I know is that they weren't even, when they started making Flutter, they were not trying to build a cross-platform SDK. That was not the original goal. They were trying to strip as much out of the Chrome engine as possible to like just make an incredibly powerful rendering engine. So they're getting down to bare bones, and I guess using Dart for some part of that. I don't really know where the Dart would come into that. Well, I guess a lot of Flutters are in C++, at least like the very low level. So I guess that's what they were working with. So that the original goal was just to build an incredibly powerful rendering engine, which I guess worked to some degree, and then they pivoted to, it sounds to me almost like it was an internal experiment because they're Google, they have that much money, and they're just like, yeah, let's just do this thing, and we'll see if anything good comes from it. And then they decided that a good use of it would be to compile down to, native code, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny, like, everybody knows what is Google Chrome, and actually is kind of getting a little bit flack here and there, especially recently, right? People, I think, are probably I think they're going now where they're going back to Mozilla. I think I hear sometimes, or Brave or whatever. But if you think about it, without Chrome, we wouldn't have Node.js, right? Because that's where V8 came from. We wouldn't have Dart and Flutter. It's crazy that like one web browser that people kind of take for granted is actually the start of quite some interesting ecosystems.
Yes, it is. And it's even more interesting that, the web, you you could trace that story back further outside of Google, and I can't remember the guy's name, but whatever guy's name is that invented JavaScript famously in 10 days or whatever, probably had no idea that the groundwork that he was, the path he was starting the world on by creating like this ugly language that he only had a few days to make. So it had to, he had to cut corners, and those corners are still with us today. Those corners, the lack of corners.
Sharp corners, I would say. Cut yourself on all the time. There's always the famous Wet Man, if you've ever seen that before.
The what?
Have you ever seen Wet Man?
I don't think so.
I'll have to share it with you at the end of the show. Maybe remind me if I don't. But there's a guy named Gary Bernhardt. He has a presentation, and you ever seen like if you do like array plus array and you get like some interesting response? Yeah, all those things. He's got a lot of this stuff, and it's quite amusing just to watch. I'm gonna have to drop it.
I think I have seen that actually.
Yeah,
it is pretty wild.
I guess if you break it all down, it actually makes sense, but still, that at least Dart kind of makes a lot more things more sane. I'm pretty happy with that. Yeah,
but originally when Dart was originally made, another point they made that I think is very valid. Is that JavaScript, because it's run by a committee or whatever, it's not run by like Google owns Dart, so they can do whatever they want. No one can say vote against them changing something. JavaScript, everything moves so slowly because you have to get buy-in from several different agencies, and so. Or whoever, several different agents of some sort. I don't really know who makes those decisions, but I think one of the biggest advantages Flutter has over React Native and stuff is that 100% of it is owned by Google, so they can do whatever they want without anybody telling them, fighting back, unlike browser standards and everything.
That's what I think was part of the problem, right? Why the people kicked back on Dart being within the browser. So they didn't want this kind of one person controlling everything. But I mean, I see your side too, right? Like, I think the other thing too you got to keep in mind too is that if you made some drastic changes to JavaScript, then what would happen to all the old JavaScript, all those old pages?
To the whole internet.
That's probably why it takes so long too.
I do like change. That I also would not want the internet to be owned by Google. That would be too much power. But an SDK, I'm okay with it.
Yeah, true. Okay, I think we're kind of approaching the end of our time. Like, it's pretty interesting, like your background. Like, the reason I like to ask about people's background is it's always interesting to see, like, okay, where'd you come from? I think we're about half or something with people having like no CS background, people having CS background, and that's interesting to hear that you really don't have to have it. But it's also good to hear that not everybody says, I wish I can go back to school. So that's interesting to hear too. Sometimes I also wish I can go back to school for my master's, but I got to find time. And a way to pay for it. Okay. So after working with Flutter for a while, like, what, do you have any like tips you want to give or like warnings you want to give to beginners, like when they start their Flutter journey nowadays?
Oof. I don't want to give too specific or too broad of a tip, but I would just do one of each. My specific tip is you will save yourself so much trouble if you just actually learn how I can't think of what the error is, but how like columns will expand forever, and that rendering bug.
Unbounded
yes, height. If you just really learn how that works, you'll save yourself so much time. Like that's not how I do things. Unfortunately, I just dive in and figure it out as I go. But once I actually learned how to fix that problem, it's like really saved me. And then conversely, my broad tip is just build stuff, because you can literally build anything with Flutter, and that's like one of the coolest things about it. And I truly think that it's going to be a big part of the future of applications, no matter where they run. So You want to build a web app, build it. Just go. Don't wait for. I guess this applies to all programming, really, but the best way to learn is to just like build cool stuff and hit your head against the wall a lot. So that applies to Flutter as well.
How about like state management solutions? Like, what do you usually use for state management when you build your Flutter apps?
Controversial opinion. I like Block better than the alternatives that I know are more popular, because similar to, like Redux, which I've never used in a Flutter app, but used on the web a lot, it's the verbosity of it makes it really easy to read. Like if a new member comes in the team and they're trying to understand how things work, it's like, these are you literally have a list, a human readable list almost. I mean, they're very, it's code, but a human readable list of all the possible like actions you can take, or whatever they're called in Block. And I think that library, events. So that's what I use personally. I think it's easy to understand. I guess another tip that reminded me of, if you're coming to Flutter, you likely will have to very soon use streams, and I don't know, they're not super popular in most other languages. So that's something you should definitely pay attention to. It's almost impossible to find a state management solution that isn't based on streams of some sort, or like conceptually at least. So I like Block, but I've never used RiverPod, which I know is like, at least a year ago, was the next big thing that was coming. And what's Provider? I like Provider is great. I think it's cool. Never used it on a big, at work, so on a gigantic project, but I'm sticking with Block.
Have you ever used the Flutter Block package?
Oh yeah, I love it.
Then you were using Provider underneath there, actually. That's why it's called Block Provider.
Well, it wasn't always written on top of Provider.
Yeah, true.
They changed it at some point. I don't know. I think they did a very good job with that. And, for a while, that was like the cool thing. Even Google recommended it for a while.
Yeah, indeed. I also use Block. I use RiverPod in one project. I kind of like it, but at the same time, I don't know. I don't know why I went, but I just found it easier to reason with is when I went for Block. I don't know why. Mm-hmm. I think it just makes much more sense for streams when I'm streaming stuff for some reason. I don't know why.
Yeah.
Actually, I think I have one last question for you, and I think it's interesting to hear from every single writer for books or whatever. Like, what was your writing process for when you wrote this book?
Ooh, basically, my daily writing process was go to a coffee shop or a co-working space, and I have to be in a sterile environment to do something like writing, because I can't be around distractions. I'm kind of like that with my work as well. So for a year there, that's probably how long it took to write the book. Then there was more work after, but for a year there, I was going to a coffee shop every Saturday and Sunday, pretty much from when I woke up to mid-afternoon, and just sitting down and writing and editing and writing the code that goes along with the book and all that stuff. I guess writing a technical book, there's a lot more writing than just writing the text, but that's pretty much, I don't know that I have like an interesting answer to that. Just go somewhere where there's no distractions and sit down and don't stand up for 5 hours.
Yeah, I hear basically two different patterns. Like, one is like wait for inspiration and then just all night cramming out the book. I heard from one guy. But the typical one is like just force yourself every day or 3 times a week to sit there for hours and just keep pounding on the keyboard. Yeah,
that's really it. For me personally, that's how I am with all work. Like, I have to carve out time to do anything, or it won't get done.
Okay. I think that's it for us. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we kind of sign off?
I don't think so. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you back on.
I'd love to listen to people I love when people will listen to me ramble.
Yeah, we actually heard compliments that people like when we banter back and forth about stuff. So
Cool.
it's nice to listen to when you're at the gym, because you can't focus on hearing about widget trees and element trees while you're trying to lift weights, right?
Yeah, I mean, that stuff's hard to learn from audio alone, for sure. Anything technical, for me personally.
Yeah, definitely. All right, thanks again for your time. I really appreciate it. Hope you have a good day.
Yeah.
And I'll catch you next time.
All right. Thanks.